So Google has a pretty interesting claim with their new Pixel Watch 5. They're saying it's more accurate than an Apple Watch Ultra 3 or a Garmin Fenix 8 when it comes to GPS accuracy. That's a pretty bold claim considering both of these are solid performers, and I actually already got to put this to the test in one of the hardest places when it comes to GPS in the streets of New York City, and the results are pretty interesting. But along with the increased GPS accuracy, they're also announcing some other new features like a new strength training feature with a new workout builder, which I think is actually going to be pretty cool. There's their new Health Guardian feature for more advanced health tracking. There's of course new AI-powered features with Gemini, as well as a bunch of other stuff we'll be talking about in today's video. And this video is all about going over everything new with the Pixel Watch 5, as well as an early sneak peek at GPS accuracy, but also be on the lookout for my full in-depth review of the Pixel Watch 5, which will be dropping a little bit after this video, so stay tuned. So on the outside, these are basically the same as before, where they have the same familiar shape and sizes, but something new this year is a new Steph Curry edition, where it has the same sort of special edition Steph Curry band like what they introduced with the Fitbit Air. However, on the inside, these are now supposed to be up to 20% faster than before, where they've increased both the processing power of the CPU by 12% and the RAM by 50%. Now, there weren't any mentions of any power savings though when it comes to battery life, but we did already see a bump last year with the Pixel Watch 4, so that's something I'll be putting to the test again this year to see how long they last. And then on the AI side of things, so they're rolling out a few different features that leverage AI. So there's new offline Gemini features where you can perform some basic tasks on the watch itself without any sort of connectivity. So this is where you could ask it to set alarms, set timers, as well as start workouts. And then beyond that, there's also new proactive or dynamic suggestions based on the context of whatever you're doing. So for example, let's say one of your friends asks for a phone number of another friend in a text message. You can actually look up that person's number in your contacts if you've given it permission, and then immediately include that in a quick reply. And you can even do some of these functions with just one hand with some of their one-handed gestures. And speaking of watch faces, they also have these new generative watch faces where you can ask it to create a watch face based on a particular theme. So for instance here's a demo where it created a watch face with a Spain theme to it. And then we also asked it to create a pizza themed watch face, and there you go, pepperoni for the win. And you will also be able to customize these a little bit too with different font styles and such. So there is a little bit of control of how these watch faces look. And they've also added a new bedtime watch face style, which turns the interface to shades of red, which may be easier on the eyes at night versus the blue light that you would normally see, which could interfere with circadian rhythms. And speaking of sleep tracking, the Pixel Watch 5 also benefits from their latest sleep algorithm updates that they recently rolled out for all Fitbit and Pixel watches, where sleep tracking is supposed to be about 15% more accurate than before. And I've got a super deep dive into how all that works in my Fitbit Air review if you haven't checked that out already. And then on the health side of things, there's also their new Health Guardian feature, and I think this has potential to be pretty big. So what this is designed to do is keep an eye on numerous health markers in the background that are already being tracked by your Pixel Watch, and it'll attempt to notify you if it detects anything that may be out of line, like let's say with heart rate or breathing quality, for example. But I think this feature has a lot of potential to go beyond what we've seen before with, let's say, Apple's Vitals feature or Garmin's Health Status feature, which I think are really cool features, but I think this may be a bit broader with what it tracks and being able to see longer term trends and attempting to notify you if it notices anything out of line. And then moving on to the workout side of things, and I think this is going to be great use of AI, where they have a workout builder where all you have to do is basically ask it to build a workout based on your particular goals. So let's say you're at a hotel and you don't have any equipment around because the hotel doesn't have a gym. So you could ask it to create a workout just by using body weight, and it creates one just on the fly. Now you could already sort of do this before, but the new part is that you can follow along these workouts on the app where you can actually see all the different workout steps and can even have videos and diagrams of some of the movements. And then taking it one step further, you can also follow along these workouts on the watch itself with audio cues and rest timers, along with the ability to log reps and weight. Now, this feature on the watch itself doesn't do any actual rep counting or exercise recognition. This is just more about showing you the reps or weight that may already be defined in the workout, and then you could edit or add these to each set after each one. And I'm actually kind of okay with not having any sort of real-time rep counting or exercise recognition, because the accuracy of these kinds of features can be hit and miss on any wearable, but that's just an important thing to know about this, is that this is not trying to count reps or identify what you're doing. The power of this really is more about the workout builder and the fact that you can actually follow along the workout in the app at the same time as your watch, which gives this feature a lot of potential. But maybe the biggest highlight of the Pixel Watch 5 is the GPS accuracy, where it's supposed to be better than a Fenix 8 or an Apple Watch Ultra 3, and that's a pretty big claim considering those are generally solid performers when it comes to GPS. Now, all these devices have dual-band or multi-band GNSS chipsets, meaning that they can not only access different satellite networks, but also multiple frequencies at one time. And what this allows watches and other devices to do is leverage more than one signal path at one time. And with more than one signal path, a device can actually choose a stronger signal, which may be more more accurate. And this kind of technology is going to be especially useful when there's interference between you and a clear view of the sky, like let's say tall buildings, rock faces or canyon walls, heavy tree cover, and even atmospheric conditions can come into play like heavy cloud cover and even thunderstorms. But even if a device has a dual band or multi-band satellite chipset, errors still can occur, whether that's going to be interference with a clear view of the sky, signals reflecting off another object, as well as some of those atmospheric conditions that we talked about before. And what Google's trying to do with the Pixel Watch 5 is reduce those errors from those additional variables by cross-referencing your GPS tracks with 3D models of the objects that may be around you, as well as reference with DGNSS, which can reduce some of the errors with the atmospheric events. But to be clear though, they aren't actually snapping the GPS tracks to ground map data like streets or trails, which we've seen before with some other brands. That's definitely a neat solution as well, but sometimes we may not actually be on that street or trail and could be a little bit off to the side. And there could be times that some of those watches aligns our tracks with roads or paths, which could be incorrect at that point. But with this technology, it's not doing that map snapping thing. So what it's more trying to do is look for any points that it thinks could be wrong based on the 3D environment around our tracks, as well as any potential environmental variables at the time, and then getting rid of anything it thinks are errors. And then it'll also use the information from the built-in sensors like the accelerometer and gyroscope to fill in any gaps from those errors. So this is really more about looking for what may be interfering with satellite signals versus the actual ground data. But all this geeky stuff aside, does this actually work? So I actually just had the opportunity to test this in the streets of New York City with 2 different runs as well as a bike ride. And on these maps, I'll have the Pixel Watch 5 in orange, I have a Fenix 8 Pro in green, and Apple Watch Ultra 3 in blue. But something also kind of special about this test is that I actually also have the pre-optimized from the Pixel Watch 5 in yellow. So basically these are the raw GPS tracks from the watch itself before it actually does any optimization. And one more note, by the way, is that I had all these in their highest accuracy modes, and with the Fenix 8 Pro, I actually also forced it into the full multi-band mode for these tests versus their auto select mode. All right, so on this run here, this is where I went under a canopy for a bit, where all of them would lose a clear view of the sky, and all of them were pretty good with the exception of the Ultra 3, which kind of wandered a little bit, and it also did the same thing on the next canopy. And we can also see here how the raw tracks from the Pixel Watch 5 started to veer off into the water, but the optimized tracks were pretty much exactly on the path where I was running. But these areas are really where watches should try to use sensor data from the accelerometer and gyroscope to fill in any of those gaps where satellite data isn't really available since there isn't a clear view of the sky. And the optimized tracks from the Pixel Watch 5 look really good. And then along the waterfront, all of them looked really good, which should be expected, but let's go ahead and go over here where I went into the buildings, which is going to be far more exciting. So as soon as I got into this first tall building section, here's where things got pretty spicy, where the Fenix 8 Pro went into the other side of the street, but I was actually right here. And I think that could have been caused by both the building on the right as well as the construction canopy I went under. And then on this street here, this looks like kind of a mess, but what I was hoping to do is test how well each of them would track me being on one side of the street versus the other, where I actually went down this street here and then crossed over right here. And while none of them actually got the exact path of me going over the crosswalk, the optimized tracks from the Pixel Watch 5 was probably the closest. And then going along this straight section here, all of them looked really good. And for these corners here, the Fenix 8 Pro was probably the most accurate, but the Pixel Watch 5 took this first corner a little bit wide. But then it did an excellent job on this corner here, where the rest of them were a little bit smoother than my actual path. And then over here, I wanted to test how these devices would do with a longer section where they wouldn't have a satellite signal. And here's where you can see the raw tracks from the Pixel Watch 5 go way off, but the optimized tracks were much closer, and interestingly, quite similar to the tracks on the Apple Watch Ultra 3. And then after I exited the tunnel, we can see how the optimized tracks from the Pixel Watch 5 as well as the Ultra 3 looked really good. And then back on this street here where I went back and forth, all of them did really well crossing the crosswalk with the exception of probably the Fenix 8 Pro. But then as soon as I got back into the waterfront, everyone was fine again. And then on this run, this was kind of interesting where everyone but the Fenix 8 Pro and the optimized tracks from the Pixel Watch 5 started out on the other side of the street. And then again, as I went around this driving range, we can see how the raw tracks on the Pixel Watch 5 didn't do as well, just like before. And then also having this sort of odd blip right here on this corner. All the other devices did really well here though, with a possible exception to the Ultra 3, which is a little bit off on these corners. And as I went under these canopies again on the pier, both the Suunto Vertical 2 I was wearing as well as the optimized Pixel 5 tracked the most accurate straight line, where you can see the others kind of jog to the right a little bit, but on the next canopy, a bit better from the Fenix 8 Pro. And along the waterfront, again, all of them were fine, but let's go ahead and move into the buildings now. And as soon as I entered this wall jungle right here, we start to see all of them veer off to varying degrees. So as soon as I crossed the crosswalk here, I think the Fenix 8 Pro probably was the closest, where it shows where I actually crossed the street. But the Ultra 3 and the optimized Pixel Watch 5 were pretty close too. However, the Suunto Vertical 2 got a little bit nuts. And the raw tracks from the Pixel Watch 5 were kind of a mess as well. Right here is kind of interesting, where I remember going under this canopy, but the Pixel Watch 5 went into the street a little bit, but after that, it was the most accurate as I went under this footbridge, where it was nice and solid along the sidewalk, where most of the others may have gotten a little thrown off by losing a satellite signal. And then on this corner, the Ultra 3 and the Pixel Watch 5 did the best, but the Fenix 8 Pro cut in and then took a little bit wide. And then this portion right here is probably one of the bigger deviations from the optimized Pixel 5 tracks, where, funny enough, the raw tracks in the Pixel Watch 5 were actually more accurate, at least on this corner. But after I rounded the corner, the Ultra 3 did the best. And then this section was really tough for all the watches, where I was in between two super tall buildings and none of them were really actually on the exact path that I was on. But I think the Ultra 3 was probably the best here, with the Fenix 8 Pro and the optimized Pixel 5 not being far behind. And then on this straight section, the Pixel Watch 5, the Ultra 3, as well as the Fenix 8 Pro were solid and really quite good. And then on this corner, the Pixel Watch 5 cut in, but the others were a little bit more accurate, although the Fenix 8 Pro kind of overshot this corner a bit. And then after that, again, mostly open again as I went on the waterfront, and then all of them did fine. And then when it comes to cycling, so this can sometimes yield a more accurate result than running, since our wrists aren't really moving, and can also be positioned pretty statically to have a clear view of the sky. And all of them did an overall decent job with this, where I didn't necessarily notice anything that was way out of line, but the difference was pretty clear between the raw, unoptimized tracks from the Pixel Watch 5 versus the optimized ones. Now, this ride was through the city on a city bike, so this wasn't at higher speed, so I can't really say at this point how it handles high-speed corners and curves, but that's something I'll be testing for my final review. And related to that, they're saying it's not just buildings where it can do their error correction, it's also supposed to work with natural terrain, so that's something I'll be also testing quite a bit, so stay tuned for those results. So from what I've seen so far, these corrected tracks were really quite good and easily some of the best tracks out of all the devices I was using. And we're talking about one of the toughest environments for any kind of device to track accurately, and any device could actually have issues, but this was really impressive to see from these first 3 tests. But there's definitely some important things to know about this feature, where all this is done after the activity is uploaded, where it does all the optimization and error correction once it syncs with the app. So there's nothing necessarily happening on the watch itself during the activity, where that's pretty much the same for the most part, but the hardware inside the Pixel Watch 5 has been optimized for this new feature. And when asked if this feature was coming to previous Pixel watches, the answer was just the Pixel Watch 5 at this time, but they also didn't say no to previous devices. And this new feature is really all about more accurate GPS tracks after we're done, so this doesn't necessarily have any impact on more accurate pace or distance during our runs or rides. However, there's usually some improvements with real-time pace with each generation, but not as significant as these new GPS track optimizations. But I have to say, this has been super impressive from what I've seen so far, and something that really only Google can do at this time, since they have so much map data with 3D data. The raw GPS tracks themselves from the Pixel Watch 5 before they're optimized were definitely hit or miss, and it was pretty interesting to see that difference, but you won't ever really see those raw uncorrected tracks with your Pixel Watch 5. Google was actually able to pull those raw GPS tracks before they're optimized, just so I could show you the difference. So almost everything new with the Pixel Watch 5 is really going to be more on the software side of things this year, which is usually the general trend with most wearables, where each year is usually either a software year or a hardware year with each generation. And I think the Health Guardian feature as well as the Workout Builder are probably the most interesting, because those aren't necessarily Pixel Watch 5 features. Those are more on the Google Health app side of things, so you could actually benefit from some of those features with previous Pixel watches. But this also starts to make a better case for their premium subscription, where before there were some good features in there, like some of the training plans and easier ways to log nutrition and workouts, but these new features add a bit more and starts to make the premium subscription a bit more interesting. Anyhow, that's your first look at everything new with the new Pixel Watch 5 this year, and be on the lookout for my full in-depth review of the Pixel Watch 5s that'll be dropping soon. And if you found the information in this video to be useful, just do me a favor and quickly hit that like button, and also make sure to check out some of my other reviews in the meantime as well. Anyhow, have fun out there, and we will see you in the next